Maria. Now, as Maria said, that we have two panelists for this session, and in order of presentation, firstly we have Charles Homan, who's a partner in UHY Hacker Young Chartered Accountants. Charles will be giving generic guidance on the support available for the self-employed, and Charles then will be followed by Brian Berry. Brian is the Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders and former Policy Director at the RICS. Brian will be outlining what the Construction Leadership Council has been doing, particularly concerning the advocacy to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and the Treasury on support. And as Maria said, after each presentation, you'll have the opportunity to address questions and alternative to give us feedback. There will be an opportunity after the webinar to pose questions should they occur to you after the webinar is concluded, and they need to be emailed to NEVA, that's NEVA at cic.org.uk, but I'll remind you of that at the end of this webinar. So I'll now hand you over to Charles.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Maria. I'm a partner in UHY Hacker Young. I will just share my screen and then take you through my presentation. Okay, so help for the self-employed in the age of the coronavirus. So what the scheme does in overview. For this, it's for the self-employed and you have lost income due to COVID-19. I know that includes the majority of self-employed, but there are certain self-employed that have actually done very well during this outbreak. So you have to have lost some income due to the coronavirus and the current situation we find ourselves in. It'll be an online service to claim, and that online service from the HMRC is not yet available. HMRC will contact you by mid-May. They will contact you directly. They won't phone you up. They will be sending out either letters or, so that's the main way that they will get in touch with you, but they haven't been clear on that yet, but they won't be sending you phone calls and asking you to go into all sorts of details. That's probably a scam. They'll make the payments directly into your bank account. So when the online portal is up and running, it'll be for you to enter your business bank account details, and that'll be in June, and then the grant will come through into that bank account. It's a grant from HMRC, the government, so it's not repayable, but as a grant, it will be treated as part of your taxable profit for the year 2021. So you will be paying tax and national insurance on that. You can also claim universal credit, but when you get the grant, that will count as part of your income. So it may affect the amount of universal credit that you receive, and it may stop you getting any universal credit. You can continue to work or take on new work or voluntary work whilst you're claiming for the grant as well. So who can claim? It's the self-employed or members of a partnership that must have submitted a tax return for 2018-19, and you must have traded in 19-20. So 2019-20, that's 6th of April 2019 to the 5th of April 2020, and you're still trading when you apply for the grant, or you would be trading if it wasn't for the coronavirus situation. So, and you intend to continue trading in 2021. So that's the 6th of April 2020 to the 5th of April 2021. So that's our tax years. And you have lost trading profits due to coronavirus. That's likely to be a self-certification, a box that'll be on the portal when it comes up to say, because of lockdowns or because of my health, or because I'm looking after a vulnerable person, or because my customers weren't making any further orders, you have actually made losses or suffered trading profit reduction during the coronavirus period of lockdown. And you will need to confirm that to HMRC. Who can claim? It's the trading profits where your trading profits are 50,000 or less. So £50,001 means you're not eligible. And it must be more than 50% of your total income for either 2018-19 or the average of the 3 years 16-17, 17-18 and 18-19 was less than 50,000. You have until the 23rd of April 2020 to submit your 2018-19 tax return and still be included within this scheme. So they've given an extra extension. The deadline, as you all will remember, was 31st of January to submit your tax return to avoid penalties. But they said, if you get your tax return in by the 23rd of April, it will still be considered by them as applicable for the grant. When they announced this scheme, they said any amendments to your tax return made after the 26th of March will be ignored. With a tax return, once you've filed it with HMRC, you've got a whole year through till 31st of January the following year to what we call repair the return. That's the accountant speak for amend it. So if something happens, you suddenly realize there's some more income or some more expenses that should have gone onto your tax return, you've got 1 year to repair your return. But if any amendments to the return after 26 will just be ignored for the calculation purposes. So it's based on the average trading profits over the 3 years, and they add together all the total profits and divide by 3. If you were not in self-employed for all 3 years, then either the average based on 17-18 and 18-19 or 18-19, as it must be continuous self-employment. So they will only take 18-19, even if in 16-17 you were self-employed, then you became employed for 17-18, then you became self-employed again for 18-19. They will ignore 16-17 and just base it on 18-19. The grant will be 80% of your average trading profit divided by 12 to give the monthly amount. And the maximum amount is £2,500 per month. And it's the intention for that to be paid for 3 months, but it might be longer. I'm rushing through these slides because I've got a fair few of them and I want to keep to my time, but they will be available after the webinar. What is the profit? The profit is the annual profits taken after your trading expenses and your capital allowances, but it's before any of the self-employed person's pension contributions. So if you've got staff and you paid their contributions, they come as expenses, but it's before your own self-employed pension contributions and it's before your charitable donations. Therefore, those self-employed, that we encourage lots of our self-employed to go out there and make sure they get their capital allowances in before their accounting year end. So if you've made some large investments into your business and claim the capital allowances, unfortunately, that will have reduced your profits and therefore potentially reduce the amount of grant that you can get. How will you claim? So HMRC will contact you directly by the middle of May. Further details on how they will contact you will be available on the gov.uk, and you'll have to go onto the gov.uk online service to make your claim. So there's no need for you to phone up HMRC and ask them when can you get your money, because that will just delay things, and they're struggling with the volume of calls that they're getting at the moment for people asking for time to pay, etc. There may be other ways for you to make the claim if you're not using the online services, but at the moment they've not announced what they are. So, and there is a handful of religious orders that don't use computers, so they will be catered for. But at the moment, the government haven't announced that. So it will run for 3 months or however much longer if needed. So at the moment, we're talking 3 months, but it might be extended, but it'll be on the monthly amount. You'll only be able to claim, so beware of the scams. There's over 400 scams that London police have already found going out as a result of the coronavirus. So just be aware. If you receive texts, phone calls or emails claiming to be from HMRC or offering financial help or a tax refund or asking you to click on links or to give personal information, it's a scam. So just be very, very careful. There are also lots of scams out there, people pretending to provide PPE or collecting for NHS. Other help is available to the self-employed. So deferring the self-assessment payment on account that would be due 31st of July 2020, that will be delayed. It's still payable. So make sure that when you're doing your cash flow forecasts and you're looking to the future, you are still being aware of that money, putting it aside. If you're using it to fund short-term cash flow, then try and reimburse it out of your profits as you trade out of this difficult period, so that when it does become payable 31st of Jan 2021, along with your balancing payment and your payment on account for the next year, you've got that money available to you. There's deferral of VAT payments. So if you're doing your VAT returns, then between now and June, you can not make the payments, but do remember, if you normally pay by direct debit, please do cancel your direct debit, otherwise the money will still go out of your account. So cancel your direct debit before you do your VAT payments, your VAT return. You've still got to file your VAT return on time. There are grants that for businesses that pay little or no rates, so the rural rates, and that will be available by your local authority. They're administering this. Some local authorities are very far advanced on this. I know one the other day, they sent through a notice. It was answered by the treasurer. Within 2 hours, the money was in the bank account, 25,000. So when you get those notices, do look at them and make the claim straight away, giving the bank account and the local authorities. Some of them are really efficient. Some of them are issuing notices saying you're going to get this, but because this is new, these grants, they weren't prepared to make the payments. So they've had to set up systems to make sure that they are making the payments to the right people. That's why some local authorities are lagging behind others. There's the business interruption loan, or CBILS, coronavirus business interruption loan schemes. They're being offered by the banks, so please do that. You've got furloughing staff, where that was on the previous webinar, 80% of gross pay plus NI plus your 3% pension contributions. Here's some examples for you. So in example one, we've got a self-employed person, 3 lots of trading profits there, add them all up, total profits. The average profit there, 22,666. The grant will be 80% of that, which will be 1,511 per month. In example 2, I've got profits 22,000 for 6 months, total profit. So therefore, they're averaging those out to give the 14 per month. So it's a short period, but they were there filling in their returns. So I've rushed through that. These are my contact details. With self-assessment, personal tax for the self-employed, there are a lot of different circumstances that people find themselves in. Some have investment income, buy-to-let, rental income, etc., whilst also being self-employed. But as long as 50% of your income is from self-employed, you're entitled to use this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Right, I've got a few questions here that if one or two of them, if you prefer to answer them jointly with Brian after his presentation, then please say so. But the first question that has come in is, could you tell me if there is any more information regarding help for the 5% self-employed workforce that is not covered by the Chancellor's bailout scheme, i.e. the recently self-employed, and in my case, those just earning over the £50,000 threshold?
Unfortunately, if you're earning over the £50,000 threshold, then you're not covered by this scheme, and you've got the universal credits, but you also, your income is too high for that. But if you're not currently working, then you can probably get the universal credits, and there are some other claims that you can get for employed people, but it's very much on the universal credits be your first port of call, and looking down that help. You can get some help to pay your rent if you're in rented accommodation, but this scheme is very much for 50,000 or less, £1 over, and you don't qualify, sadly. And for the recently self-employed, because this is a new scheme that's been put out fairly quickly, to ensure that it's not open to abuse and fraud, the government have made it so that there's a very small minority of newly self-employed, and I've got several clients in that category that therefore can't take advantage of this scheme. So it's to try and limit the exposure to fraud. Those handful of people suffer, but they can still qualify for universal credit at the enhanced amount to help them out, so they're not totally alone.
Okay, thanks, Charles. The questions are coming in thick and fast. The second question, I would be interested to find out more information on freelancers taking lower earning limit of £6,600 as a salary and the balance of my income made up of company dividends. I've got another question on a similar that later.
Yeah, that's very common. Most of us accountants have advised owner-managed businesses for limited companies. So limited companies aren't, directors and owners of limited companies are not self-employed. So they were covered on last week's webinar, because just because they're a director and a shareholder, they are actually employed by the company, and therefore they should be on a payroll scheme, and therefore they can furlough themselves to a certain degree as long as they're fulfilling their duties as a director, but they will only get the 80% of that small salary. So that's not part of this webinar, because unfortunately director shareholders of limited companies are not in the self-employed, but it is in the previous webinar.
Yeah, it was. I've got a question here which from Lorraine Shepherd, carer of the National Association of Shop Fitters and Interior Contractors. This might be one that we defer until Brian has made his presentation. But
okay,
it's saying, Lorraine is saying, could you discuss apprentices and how they are being looked after during COVID-19? One of our members has a teenage son who is a construction apprentice and is looking for that advice. Do you want to defer that until later?
But as an apprentice, he will be on the payroll, and yes, Brian can come back on this later, but if he's on the payroll, then if he's being furloughed, he would be eligible for the 80% of the furloughed amount salary up to the 2.5 plus plus. But so he would be employed, not as a self-employed apprentice.
Okay. There's a question here from Simon. What is the start date? Is it the 1st of March?
That's my understanding, yes.
Right. And then I have another question here from Paul is, how will HMRC class a sole director of a limited company taking a small annual salary? Well, that's really to do with the dividends that we discussed earlier. So
yes, they'll be employed, not self-employed.
Yeah. Okay. A question here from Craig. I started self-employment for the last 5 months of the tax year 18-19 and have been self-employed since, my startup costs reduced my profits in those months to less than £60 during the tax year. Should I amend my accounts to move startup costs into year 19-20, or will HMRC take that into consideration?
No, unfortunately, he's got, I mean, it's same as with the capital allowances, etc. He's got low profits. The HMRC are basing it on the filed tax return that has gone in and was not being amended since 23rd of March.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Now, just bear with me here. Do you know if the grant for businesses paying little or no rates applies to Northern Ireland through local councils?
It will. There is a slightly different scheme, but yes, it is. My understanding is it comes from there. There is some guidance on the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Governments. So I will look at that during Brian's presentation and come back with a better answer later on.
Okay, thanks for that. And is the 3 months beginning from March or April, please?
It's March is my understanding.
Yes, it's March. Okay. Another question here. I have a mixture of architectural work income and rental income, which go on the same tax return. Is all included?
It's the self-employed, as long as that is more than 50% of your total income for the tax year.
Okay. I have a question here from Pete, who's saying, I think universal credit requires less than 16,000 savings, including tax and VAT payments. That's just the statement, but you're nodding, Charles.
Yes. So therefore, if you've got more savings, then you won't qualify for the universal credit. And if you do get this grant, then that will be taken into account with your total income, etc., for universal credit claims, and therefore you may not get any universal credit after you've had this grant and then have to reapply. But the reapplying, I've been told, will be much smoother and quicker than an initial application because you're already on their records.
Okay. Question from Sarah: Do you have to ask to defer July tax payment, or is it automatic?
Originally, you were going to have to ask, but now it's becoming automatic. Okay. But if you've got some tax outstanding, then phone up and use the time to pay for any tax that's outstanding, PAYE, VAT, or income tax, and the revenue are being very obliging. So, but there is a phone number for the revenue to phone up and ask for time to pay and come to a payment arrangement. And it's much quicker for you to do it than to get your accountant to do it, because when they speak to the accountant, they then want to get authority to discuss payment plans with the taxpayer. We can do it, but it ends up being very expensive with us sat on the phone listening to music for half an hour until we get through to somebody.
Okay, questions come back about the issue of directorship. This is saying, I'm a director and self-employed. I receive dividends and pay myself the minimum salary. Am I eligible? Is that...
Dividends aren't self-employed. Yeah. So self-employed is trading income. Dividends are investment income. And the director's remuneration at the 600 odd, that is employment. So you're not self-employed. You're employed by your limited company, which you own and you're a director of, but you're not self-employed.
Pete has come back saying, would it be possible for us to make representations to be made for those self-employed who are making over 50,000 profit, please? I think we need to perhaps sort of discuss that and how, where that representation can be made, whether that's something that Construction Leadership Council can be made, or We do have a conference call with the minister later on in the week, and that might be a question we could put to them.
Yes, I think that would be an appropriate forum. What they might do is come back and say, if you're earning over the 50,000, then the CBILS loan scheme, the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, is your way forward, so that the banks will lend you funds, and there's no personal guarantees up to 250,000. You have to submit a claim. They're quite readily making these claims as long as you fill in the application correctly and they can see you've got a viable ongoing business. And so they're quite happy to make those loans and therefore give you the cash flow to enable you to carry on. And that might be their answer for those that are over the 50,000. But it is a loan that you will have to repay.
Yeah, there are quite a number of questions on this. Raymond has posed the same question, so hopefully we've answered that for Raymond as well. Do you know if the grant for businesses paying little or no rates applies to Northern Ireland? Oh, we dealt with that one. Sorry. Is it likely that the grant will be backdated to the start of the lockdown, i.e. when we were no longer able to work?
My understanding is it's from the 1st of March onwards.
Right. Okay. Could the local authority grant scheme be an option for self-employed just over the 50k limit?
Only if you've got premises that you were paying small rates or you were eligible for rural rates relief.
Okay. Got a message here from John Telfer saying help. I'm not quite sure what help he's looking for. Maybe John.
Very happy to take questions afterwards if you've got very specific issues.
Yeah. Is there any amount that we can earn at the moment that could have the grant withdrawn?
They say you can have a second employment now. You could sign up and become a shelf stacker, a delivery person, go and work in the care sector or volunteer. And because you may then be employed by those supermarkets, etc., that wouldn't affect your grant application because you're showing that previously you were a carpenter, you were earning 36,000 evenly across the year, and because of coronavirus lockdown, you're eligible for the grant for your carpentry business.
Okay, I have a question from Maria saying, hi, I saw somewhere that if you get the grant, you need to be in the same business in the next tax year. I do home refurbishment and I'm not expecting massive works for next year. So what happens if I get the grant, but next year I'll start to work always as an architect, but as employed in an office?
As I said on my slide, you have to be employed in the same self-employment when you make the grant and intending to carry on in the future, unless you are restricted by the coronavirus lockdown. So I know there are certain people in the construction world that, because they've had cancer or what have you in the past, are not allowed out for 12 weeks. They're earning no money, but it's their intention that post-lockdown they go back out and carry on with their same business. As a self-employed person, if you're in the construction world, you could have been running a general builder beforehand and then go more specialized afterwards as a plasterer. But as long as you're still running that through your same self-employed business, it's still the construction trade. So I'm sure that would be okay. But if you are giving up being an interior designer to then go on somebody's payroll, you wouldn't be carrying on your business as an interior designer, and therefore, if it's not your intention to carry it on, then you wouldn't be covered. Okay. But it may be that actually you turn around and keep your interior designer business going and advertise, If you don't get any customers coming through, then you've carried on trading, but without any turnover. But the revenue will be looking out to try and cover themselves, but they can't blame you for taking on an employee salary where you've got no income coming in from any other sources. But you can be employed and self-employed at the same time in two different worlds.
Okay, thanks, Charles. I have got some other questions, but I think
Brian.
before I sort of bring Brian in, and then I'll deal with the questions later. I've just had a question regarding the previous webinar from Mark Richards, and just to say that you can reference that on our website, the Construction Industry Council website, at www.cic.org.uk. Okay, we'll come on to, I do have a few more questions, but we'll come on to those in a short while, because I'd like to bring in Brian now with his presentation. I'll hand over to you, Brian.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd just bring up my presentation to share with you all. So I think we're okay. Right, hopefully that's working. So I think the first thing I want to say is I'll be giving a perspective from the construction industry point of view. Sorry, I'm having problems moving my slide. Oh, there we are. So just to explain, so as I said, talking about the construction industry, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Federation of Master Builders. So we are a trade body representing 7,500 small building companies across the UK. And interestingly, we were set up during the Second World War. So we were born out of a crisis, and I feel we've almost gone full circle, given what's been happening over the last month or so. Our members are the typical building company you'll find in any town or village. 75% are micro companies, so they're employing 5 or fewer people, doing a range of repair and maintenance work, as well as doing some commercial work and doing house building as well. So it's a real spectrum of construction work across the board. And just to flag up that our members are independently inspected on joining by the British Board of Agreement, because there is an issue about builders. What is a builder? Because there's no definition really of a builder, and there's no registration or licensing required. So we try to ensure that members of our trade body are fully competent and comply with our code of practice. Now, as a trade body, we are working very closely with our colleagues through the Construction Leadership Council. And if you're not so familiar about the CLC, it is a sort of an umbrella group of different bodies, from clients to major contractors to specialists, providing a forum, I think, for all of us in the construction industry. And I think in the past, we've been hearing a lot about construction needing a voice. And I think this probably comes to the best we're getting at the moment in providing a sort of joined up response to the coronavirus. And it's an opportunity, I think, for all of us in construction to put our concerns on the table, and for the CLC to actually prioritise those concerns and then put them through to government. And we're fortunate to have daily meetings, so there's a lot on the agenda, as you can imagine. And we've also got a representative from the Department for Business, BAYS, so we've got a direct link into government. And of course, that's really useful at this time when we need to get messages straight through to government about the concerns that we're facing. Just to put all this into context, I think it's just worth reminding ourselves of some of the figures about the construction industry in which we all work, because up until recently, there are about 300,000 companies connected in some way to the construction industry. And it's a big employer. 2.4 million people are employed in construction. And you can see that that's worth about £117 billion per annum. And I think that's where the CLC comes in, because I think it really starts giving a voice to those figures, because often it's quite fragmented. And by joining together, we can say, actually, look, we do contribute a huge proportion of the UK's GDP at that 7%. And I think going forward, the two statistics at the bottom are really relevant, because we are going to need construction to get us out of this crisis when we start coming back into work. And if the government's investing in construction, for every £1 invested, it generates £2.84. I think I've lost it off my screen. And 92 pence of every pound stays in the UK. These are just the type of things we're going to need from next month onwards, as we come out of the coronavirus crisis and start rebuilding the economy going forward. So what has been the impact so far? Well, I can talk about my members, who are, as I mentioned, are the small building companies in the construction sector. So we've been carrying out some surveys to find out what has been happening. And for our members, the impact was immediate, because most of them are doing repair, maintenance, home improvement work. And homeowners, obviously, quite rightly, very concerned about having builders in their home. And so work dried up. So within the first week or so, 67% of our members had stopped work on 91% of on-site. And the main reasons for that, given the lack of materials, the breakdown in the supply chain, and also, and it's quite controversial, about the adherence to Public Health England guidance. As you know, workers need to maintain a 2-metre distance between themselves. And that's a major problem, I think, on a building site. And which is why the FMB, we've gone slightly away from the CLC and said actually all construction work apart from emergency and critical work should stop. Whereas government guidance of construction work can continue if PHE guidance can be adhered to. So actually at the moment, only about a quarter of our members are still working. And the impact on staff and employment, you can see that 98% estimate that 25% or fewer of their staff can work from home, which makes sense because to be a builder, you need to be on site. And 8% had already begun to make redundancies. And I'm sure that figure has gone up over the last week or so as the impact has started to bite. So the government obviously has stepped in. We're seeing unprecedented measures from the government to help the country and obviously which has benefited the construction industry. There have been 2 major packages which you're familiar with, the Job Retention Scheme and of course the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, which we've just heard about in terms of its operation. And in addition to that, of course, the government has said actually there are deferrals for paying your VAT and your income tax. There is the universal credit, which has been increased, but again, it's a pretty low level and your savings have to be very low as well. And of course, you can defer your mortgage for 3 months as part of the deal. So there are these limited measures to help the self-employed going forward. So we've touched on this earlier. Charles was talking about this. The Self-Employment Income Support Scheme was announced by the Chancellor in March. And that's important because 40% of those working in construction are self-employed. So it is obviously of major importance to our sector. And when the government did announce this, from the FMB's point of view, we issued a press release saying there was a collective sigh of relief because originally the emphasis seemed to be very much on the PAYE and not on the self-employed. And we had been calling for some time through the Construction Leadership Council for parity with the Job Retention Scheme. And so at the moment, we've got the support scheme in place for 3 months, and we'll see now whether the government needs to renew it after that period. But, and here's the warning, although we gave a collective sigh of relief, it wasn't very long before we realised there were some dangers lurking in that financial package because 2 million self-employed workers could or have fallen through the cracks. So I just want to flag up some of those concerns. So for those self-employed people who are falling through the cracks, I mean, the first thing is, of course, is they're having to wait until June to get their money. And I know from my members that cash flow is a major issue, and having to wait that long may result in some people going out of business. So that is a major concern. 49% will see their income fall by at least 40% in the short run if their work has dried up before the grants are paid. So that's demonstrating there clearly the impact it's going to have. And 25% of self-employed people earning less than 50,000 a year have said, according to a survey from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, that they won't have enough assets to cover 3 months lost earnings. And more critically, 15% have said they won't have enough money to cover for 1 month. So these are real concerns in our industry and wider about the government support and where people are not getting the help that they need at this time. So we carried out our own survey in the FMB to find out what was happening. And what we found out was that 80% of those who responded were directors of limited companies, of which 58% of them received their income through dividends. And I'll come back to that in a minute. 69% reported that the job retention scheme wouldn't provide enough support. And because most of my members work in the repair and maintenance sector, this is where these are the builders I think are our hardest hit. They felt the impact right at the beginning. So their cash flow has dried up almost immediately from the beginning of the month. So this is the issue I think we touched on earlier, but it's becoming a big issue within the industry about those companies who have set up a small limited company run by 1 or 2 directors with no other employees. So they're the owner managers of their own company. And historically, they have taken a minimum salary, typically £166 a week, 12,500 a year to avoid the tax, and they draw down the dividends, which is perfectly legal. And this is a very common way to set up a small company in construction. But of course, the government hasn't at the moment got any support mechanism for shareholders. So it's these very small companies who are drawing down their dividends who are now beginning to be excluded from the help that they're going to need. And given that they make up a large proportion in the construction industry, that's where help is needed. So there is a gathering momentum of institutions and bodies calling for the government to review this to help those small limited companies. The Institute of Directors have flagged up the issue, the Institute of Fiscal Studies. There's been growing national media coverage. There's a big piece in the Sunday Times about the companies that have been adversely affected. And I'm pleased to say the Construction Leadership Council has taken up the issue as well. And the CLC wrote quite a long letter to the Prime Minister outlining its concerns. And you can see there the paragraph that was calling for support for the directors of micro businesses, because it does seem very unfair that these companies who are the entrepreneurs, the people we're going to need going forward to keep the country going, are the ones who aren't getting help at the moment. So in terms of rounding up, the FMB is calling for a review of financial help for companies not eligible for self-employed financial help. And also we're expanding that as well about grants. We were hearing about those earlier. When the crisis started, the government introduced grants of up to £25,000 for the hospitality and sector, but not for small building companies. And it's those companies, I would argue, that need the cash now. And that £25,000 would make a huge difference. It would keep a lot of those small companies in business over the coming couple of months, so that they can ride out the crisis and then start to perform afterwards. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brian. There's a question particularly for yourself. There are other general questions that I'll come on to shortly, from Mark, saying that he's been a member of FMB for many years. How far have the FMB got with grants for companies that don't have business premises? We all pay tax, some more than others. hearing many stories of individuals receiving grants for £10,000. They don't pay rates as they don't earn enough. It seems like Christmas to many. The only option is the loan system, high interest rates. He applied for the loan on the 25th of March and still hasn't had an answer.
Yeah, I have my total sympathy. We called for grants to be extended to small building companies because we recognised the impact was immediate. So we have put that through. We've been talking to the Construction Leadership Council about this. We've been in contact with government ministers. We wrote to Alex Sharma ourselves to actually put forward this. We haven't seen any movement yet on this provision of grants. It's something we continue to lobby the government on, particularly as the loans, my members, and I think it's common across the board, are telling me actually that they're struggling to get a loan. I put the call out about, can you, to our members, can you give me some examples of where you've received a loan from the bank? And I had two. But if we've only got two case studies, we can go back to government with to say, actually, yeah, it's worked. And the majority, we did a survey, 84% were waiting to hear back from the banks. They've submitted their application and it's all gone quiet. And today I was hearing on the news, the British Chamber of Commerce was saying that actually, I think it's about 3% have succeeded in getting a loan. Clearly, it's not working. There's a disconnect there. And so the government needs to look at where that blockage is, because the money is needed now. And that's the message we keep saying time and time again. You need to get the cash into people's pockets now if they're going to survive over the coming months, because otherwise they're not going to be there. And I think that's absolutely critical when we've got a skills crisis in the building industry. And if we're going to build the homes and the infrastructure that this country needs, we've got to retain the companies we've got at the moment. Otherwise, they're just not going to be there when we come out of this crisis.
Thanks, Brian. I have and this is probably a question for you, Charles.
Okay.
But if a 3-month average of self-employed income is less than £50,000, that is okay. What about if one of those years is above 50k? Is it based upon the average and not refused because of 1 year?
Yes, it's based on the average. So if you can look at the average of the 3 years, and if that's below the 50k, then that will qualify. So if you've had 1 year with 55 and 2 years with 20, then you'd be in. But if you've had interruptions, so you've had 20 in 16, 17, employed in 17, 18, and then 55, you're out, sadly.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Yeah, I mean, this issue of £50,000 seems to be recurring as a sort of question, and a sort of couple of respondents now are saying, you know, can it be fair that someone on PAYE earning 250,000 will receive help, where a self-employed person just over 50k will receive nothing? Do either of you have a view on that?
Well, I think, you know, we said at the beginning when there needs to be parity between the self-employed and the PAYE, and that didn't happen at the beginning. And although the government upped its support for the self-employed, I think that's a fair point. It's still not parity with the PAYE, and there should be. And I know some of the reasons why originally that wasn't the case, but we are in a national crisis. We all need to pull together, and we need the self-employed for the future of this country. So I think that's a fair point about the 50,000.
Well, I mean, the point was made earlier, wasn't it, about how we might make representation, and again, there's another point here about, you know, can representations be made, and I think perhaps we should think about how we might do that.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Okay, if for one of the year's self-employed income is less than 50%, how is it worked out? Is that one for you, Charles?
Yes, you would be looking at the 18-19, and if your self-employed was 45% in 17-18, but 51% in 18-19, then you would just be looking at the 18-19 as a 1 year.
Right. Brian, John Telfer, I mean, he's saying that, as a freelance worker, he won't get any money before June. But he then says that, obviously, that you said in your presentation that most construction has stopped, as we know. The laying of full fibre broadband seems to be continuing, even though workers are not 2 meters apart and work does not seem essential. He's being told that this is a government work. Are you aware of this, Brian? Is John right?
Well, the government has said construction work can continue, provided construction companies adhere to Public Health England guidance, which stipulates that there needs to be a 2 meter distance. And also for building work in people's homes, that should only be essential. That's the word used, essential. Now, that's the line that's been mirrored by the CLC. The FMB has taken the view that all construction work, apart from emergency or critical work, should stop. So we're at a slight difference there with our colleagues in the CLC. But I think everyone in the CLC accepts that actually that the guidance needs to be adhered to. And it's important that all construction companies do that. Now, I recognise it can be quite challenging on the construction site trying to maintain 2 meters. So if people are seeing that happening, that is, and as it's carrying on, that is not good, because that's damaging public health, and it's not doing much for reputation. But I'd like to think, actually, with the new site operating procedures document that's been published, companies will be much more aware of the procedures and processes they need to put in place to maintain the safety of their workers.
Stephen, could I just add to what Brian said, that in case people on this call don't know it, the third version of the site operating procedures were published this morning. Yeah. And they do go into great detail about what should be done and what shouldn't be done. They link, of course, to the PHE guidance, and they're not at variance with it, but they make it a bit more construction specific. And people can find it on the CIC website, the Construction Leadership Council website, the Build UK website, probably the FMB website, Brian, I guess. It's
we will refer to it, don't worry, we will refer to it.
Thank you for that, Graham. Right, we've only got 5 minutes left before the webinar is due to conclude, and I've still got some open questions, so if we can just canter through these quickly. Peter's saying, is rental income part of self-employed income or separate?
Separate. Investment income.
A good brief answer. As self-employed work fluctuates from month to month anyway, if applying for the self-employed grants, are you eligible if you take on any work at all in the next 3 months? For example, the majority of work may have dried up, but a customer may require one piece of work done. This would not provide enough income to survive, or equivalent to the 80% monthly grant. Do you have to turn down all self-employed work jobs to be eligible, i.e. do no other work?
No, take the work that comes, as long as you can demonstrate that you have lost as a result, i.e. you've had 1 or 2 contracts where you can't go on site, you haven't been able to get the income in the normal, or the cash in the normal flow, so people have delayed, you've been affected by the coronavirus lockdown, then, which it shouldn't be too hard. I know some construction workers were working very hard to get the screens out and to do all the work on the Nightingale hospitals, etc. But once they're done, their work might dry up. So they've got voids. If they've got voids where they wouldn't normally have voids, then that's affected them. And I think it will be self-certificate on the claim when the portal is up and running.
And will tax rebates be delayed for 19-20 tax returns?
My understanding is all repayments for VAT and tax rebates should come through as soon as possible. They won't. The aim is to get money back to everybody as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. So if you're due one, do chase up HMRC to get it back.
And I have a question here from Les, who's saying, when accounts are submitted with a loss for 1 year, does that disqualify for support?
No, it would be, they're looking at the average of the 3 years or the last year. So it depends. If 18-19 was a loss, but 16, 17, 17, 18 were profits. Add them 3 together, get your average, and base it on that.
And Les has actually come back with a question. There seems to be queries as to whether REDOR does apply to construction work. Is that one for you, Brian?
Sorry, RIDDOR?
Yeah. RIDDOR.
Does it apply? Yeah, well, it would in terms of access. Yeah, you still need to notify. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just take one final question, which probably really relates to the previous webinar from our good friend Lynn Sini, who's saying, I'm aware that a number of organisations, including IPSI, are asking the government to relax the condition that a limited company sole director must complete furlough for a fixed period to get the 80% wage support. This would mean the director can keep their business ticking in the same way, over the same way as those who are self-employed, and support clients who cannot continue a full project but need it to tick over. Do any of the panel have any other information about this? And could CLC, CIC join the lobbying for this? Well, of course, directors who have been furloughed can still continue their statutory responsibilities. And I know in the previous conference call with the minister, there was talk about the possibility of it being reduced from 3 to 2 weeks. I don't think we've seen any movement on that yet. I don't know whether either of you have got any further comment on that.
I think we're warning about the 3 week. There's no movement on that, so I think that's here to stay for the time being.
Okay, well, I think that concludes today's webinar, and thank you to everyone who's. Thank you both to Brian and Charles for your presentations, and thank you to everyone who's posed their questions. It's been quite an interesting discussion here. I just wanted to conclude by reminding you that if there are any further questions, you can continue to submit them to neva@cic.org.uk. That's NNEEVA@cic.org.uk. And just to say that there will be a further webinar on Thursday, the 23rd of April in the afternoon, time to be confirmed if you have a look at our website, and that will be about turnaround and recovery. So I think on that optimistic note, we should conclude this webinar. Thank you all and stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye.